Before we get started, I just wanted to say that my name is Rory. I've been studying Spanish for over 4 years now, and this is the first video that I've done outside. I'm normally locked up in my room recording these videos, but the weather was too nice in London today to not go out and enjoy it. And if you are from the UK, you know that the weather is horrible 80–90% of the time, so we've got to really cherish these days when the sun is out. Before we get into this video as well, there's a couple of disclaimers I wanted to make. First of all, if you are from one of these countries that I'm going to talk about in this video, please forgive me if I do misinterpret anything or talk about something that is incorrect or isn't particularly related to your country. This is just my experiences of learning Spanish and listening to Spanish for a good couple of years from these countries. And if I do make any mistakes, I'm really, really sorry. Please don't hesitate to correct me as much as you want in the comments. This is just my advice and the things that I've learned and been exposed to while listening to Spanish. And also, I know I said that I'm going to touch on 5 countries within this video, but realistically, within each of these countries, there's so much variation within the Spanish that they speak and the different slang and different accents that they have. So again, you've got to sort of take this into consideration. And I'm not going to talk about every single dialect or region of Spanish within each country because we'd be here all day. I'm just going to sort of touch on the different accents and slang that I've been accustomed to that apply to these countries. And I just wanted to mention as well, there will be timestamps in this video, so you can skip to the countries that most interest you, so you don't have to waste any time watching through the whole video. And without further ado, let's get into the video. And the first country I wanted to mention in this video is Argentina. Argentina probably has my favorite accent. I just find it really cool the way they speak, and yeah, I just love it, to be honest. But at first it wasn't like that. At first I found it incredibly difficult to understand even a word they were saying, and yeah, it sort of took a long time for me to overcome this sort of confusion and difficulty understanding the way they spoke. And that was for a couple of reasons. I think the first thing was boseo. They use boseo, which is basically instead of tu, they say vos, and instead of you are, eres, they would say sos. And also then some of the verbs change as well. When you say vos, you wouldn't say quieres, you say quieres. Instead of puedes, you say podes. Some examples, decís instead of dices, mentís instead of mientes. There's just some things like that that Voseo has that I just wasn't aware of. Another thing that's really, really different from Argentina to other Spanish-speaking countries is the double L and Y sound. Instead of it being like a normal y sound, it's more of a sh. For example, instead of saying yo me llamo, it'll be yo me llamo. And that's just crazy to me. I just couldn't get my head around that when I was first started listening to it. It sounded like a different language to me. Over time, I've realized how cool and interesting that is. And yeah, I've sort of fallen in love with the way that they speak. But I'm too far gone to start learning Spanish from Argentina. If I would, I could, but I'm too far gone to start learning Spanish from Argentina. So I'm going to have to stick with another country that I'm more familiar with. But yeah, Argentine Spanish I find really, really cool. And another thing about Argentine Spanish is they sort of speak like Italians. They have this sort of melodic, sort of like, I don't know, I don't even know. I don't want to imitate it because, like I've said, I'm terrible at imitating Spanish from Argentina. But they have this sort of melodic way of speaking, which I find really, really cool. Interestingly enough, it actually originates from Italy because apparently during the 20th century, there's a lot of immigration from Italy to Argentina and Uruguay. And Uruguay also has this sort of similar melodic flow, and it also has the sort of sha sound that you're used to hearing in Argentina. So yeah, there's a lot of immigration from Italy to Argentina and Uruguay, and as a result, they sort of developed this sort of melodic way of speaking Spanish, which I just find really, really cool. And if you are interested in hearing some Argentine Spanish, one extremely difficult challenge that I'd give you is listening to the Messi interview on Olga. It's a YouTube channel called Olga. And when I first started understanding and listening to Spanish, I tried listening to that interview with Messi, and it is one of the hardest things I've ever heard in Spanish. Like literally, it took me 4 or 5 listens to understand 30% of what they were saying. It was just ridiculous. But it is quite a funny interview, and I think, yeah, that was a good way of understanding how difficult Spanish from Argentina can be. And before we move on, I wanted to give a couple of slang words that I've learned listening to Spanish from Argentina. One of them will be boludo. Boludo is one of my favorite words. Used in so many different contexts, it can be used to sort of call, like, as a little bit of an insult, like you're a bit of an idiot, or it can just be used just when you're having a conversation with someone. It's just boludo is sort of a way of addressing them or talking to them. And you have pibe or piba, and that's sort of a way of calling like a little kid or a youngster. Obviously, pibe will be masculine, piba will be feminine. And then we have chabón, I think is how you pronounce it, chabón. And it's basically a way of talking about or describing someone that you don't know their name. So like that guy, chabón. And then chabona would be like that girl, just someone that you don't really know the name of. It's a way of addressing them. And if you are interested in listening to more Spanish from Argentina, I'd recommend Davo Zenese. He's a YouTuber. He basically talks exclusively about football. So I'm sorry if you're not interested in football, it might not be your cup of tea, but it's the main person that I listen to when I'm listening to Spanish from Argentina. And he basically just does loads of debates on football. He interviews loads of footballers, and he's got a crazy knowledge of football from around the world, not just in South America. He's got a crazy knowledge about international football and football in Europe. Yeah, he's just a great person to watch. And also, I want to learn and understand a bit more about football from South America. I'll leave a link to the description anyway, so you can check him out if you're interested. And the second country I wanted to mention in this video is Colombia, because this summer I'm actually going to Colombia for over 2 weeks, and I'm traveling around quite a lot. So I've been really trying to brush up on my Colombian Spanish and learn a little bit more about the different dialects and the different types of Spanish that you'll hear in different parts of Colombia. Generally speaking, I think Colombian Spanish is quite an easy one to understand. It's quite smooth and laid back and chilled, and I personally really, really like that. And the first accent I wanted to mention is Rolo. Rolo is generally described as more neutral. In Colombia, it's found in the capital, Bogota, and sort of the surrounding region, and they generally speak quite clearly. They pronounce the J, the Jota, like very smoothly and not too harshly. Yeah, also they sort of stretch out the ending of their words, and it sort of goes up at the end. I would try and pronounce it, but I didn't want to butcher this Colombian accent. Yeah, the Rolo accent is generally the more neutral one that you'd find in the capital, Bogota. And the second accent I wanted to mention in this video is Paisa. Paisa is found in a city called Medellin, which is just west of Bogota and sort of the surrounding regions of Medellin. And they sort of have the opposite of the Rolo accent when it comes to the end of a sentence. The final word sort of goes down instead of up. And again, they elongate the word out and it sort of finishes with sort of a decrease in pitch and a decrease in tone, which is the opposite of the Rolo accent. In the Paisa region, they use Boseo more, which I mentioned in Argentina, which is sort of the boss is two and the sos is eres, that kind of thing. So they use more of that in Medellin, I think. And the third accent that I wanted to mention is the Caribeño or Costeño accent, which is found in the north, which makes sense. Caribeño is close to the Caribbean and is also by the coast, so that's where the names come from, Caribeño or Costeño. This accent is quite an interesting one. They sort of almost pronounce their S's as H's. Basically, when they're saying an S, they breathe out. Instead of S, it'd be eh. I don't know, it's very hard for me to imitate it, but it's kind of like they breathe out when they're pronouncing their S's, which I find quite cool. But again, it can be quite hard to understand if you're starting out learning Spanish. But yeah, these are sort of the three dialects that I've learned a little bit about while learning Spanish from Colombia. And I hope this has helped. And again, some of the slang that you will hear in Colombia will be parce, una bobada, chévere, que chimba, huepucha. And yeah, those are some of the words you might hear if you go to Colombia or listening to Colombian Spanish. And if you're interested in listening to some more Colombian Spanish, there's a podcast I listen to quite regularly at the moment, and that is called Aleja y la Grúa. And it's just a podcast with a couple. It is pretty funny, to be honest. They just talk about stories from their past and also just stories from their listeners. So yeah, that's a good one that I'd recommend if you're trying to sort of improve your Spanish and listen to more Colombian Spanish. And before we continue, I just want to say, if you are interested in investing some money into your Spanish learning, you can book a free call with me and we can discuss how you can fit into my one-to-one coaching program. There's a link in the description, and let's continue with the video. Now, the third country that I wanted to mention in this video is Spain. I've literally just got back from Barcelona yesterday and it was incredible. I had a great time, and hopefully I've got some videos coming out. I've got a challenge of me speaking only Spanish for 24 hours. Hopefully it'll be coming out soon. Now, Spanish from Spain is sort of the first country that I learned a lot of my Spanish from, because in school, being in the UK, that's the country that they teach a lot of Spanish from. And I know one thing that my Spanish teacher always said to me was, the further you go south in Spain, the harder it is to understand. So once you reach sort of Andalusia and that sort of region down south, it is incredibly difficult to understand and some of the hardest Spanish to understand, period, full stop. And if I'm being honest, I haven't really listened to much Spanish from Andalusia, so I can't really speak too much on that. But this is just from what I've heard and been told from people. But I'd say generally speaking, I think Spanish from Spain is not incredibly difficult to understand. But again, I guess it depends on the region. I just got back from Barcelona, and I think the Spanish there is quite decent. And from the TV and the things I've listened to, it's generally been from that Barcelona region, so the Catalonia region. I don't really have any issues understanding them, even when I was at a more intermediate level. Yeah, obviously a big thing in Spain is that they have the vosotros. That can be one thing that's very confusing, because Spain, as far as I know, is the only country that has vosotros. And that basically means that when you're referring to a group of people, you don't use ustedes. For example, if you're saying that you are all talking, you wouldn't say hablan, you would say hablais. And that's a difference that only happens in Spain. They have that vosotros form of conjugating a verb, which can be very confusing if you're used to listening to Latin American Spanish. So yeah, that's one big thing in Spain. And also they don't use voseo, they use tuteo. So they say tu and eres. Obviously in Spain, they pronunciate the G and the H sounding words with like a ch. So for example, gente or joven, those kind of words they pronounce with that sort of scrapey thing at the back of the throat. I don't really know how to describe it, but it's a bit harsher sounding. But yeah, I've listened to a lot of Spanish over the years. And if you are interested in listening to more Spanish from Spain, like I've said in a lot of my videos now, I think I've probably said it in almost every video, Ibayanos. I know I love listening to him. He's hilarious. And again, I'm a massive football fan, so he talks to a lot of footballers and has a lot of football-related content. And he interviews other artists I'm interested in that are Spanish-related. So yeah, Ibayanos is probably my favorite person to listen to if I was listening to Spanish from Spain. And an artist I really like from Spain as well that I wanted to mention is Rosalia. She's incredible. I really like a lot of her music. But again, I can barely understand a word she says in her music. So I wouldn't try and listen to her to improve your comprehension, but she is incredible and a very good artist if you're interested in listening to some more sort of like flamenco, pop inspired music from Spain. And before we move on, here's some slang from Spain. Tío, chaval, que guay, me flipa, me mola. One exception that I found when listening to Spanish from Spain is the Northwest. So I know I've said in this video, the further you go south, the harder it is to understand Spanish, and this is what I've always been taught. But I found a region in the Northwest called Galicia, I find that really difficult to understand, and I'm not sure why that is, but I'm just thinking of an example of La Resistencia is a YouTube channel and a TV show, and the host is from the Northwest. And when I listen to that host speak Spanish, it's really, really difficult for me to understand. And it's the only sort of contradiction that I've had when thinking of the North is really easy to understand. But when I've heard a couple of people speak Spanish from Galicia, I find it quite difficult, and I'm not sure what that is. But yeah, that's just one exception to be aware of. And the fourth type of Spanish that I wanted to mention in this video is from Puerto Rico. For me, the main way that I've been exposed to and listened to a lot of Puerto Rican Spanish by music, they've got so many incredible artists that I really, really like. For example, Osuna. Osuna is probably my favorite Hispanic artist. Bad Bunny, Mike Towers, Eladio Caron. Those artists have sort of exposed me to the Puerto Rican style of speaking Spanish. For example, the R at the end of a word is an L. So it'd be like hablar. Instead of por, it'd be pol. Instead of convencer, it'd be convencer. And it's that kind of thing. They kind of replace the R with the L. I don't know. This sounds really cool. Also, instead of saying like así que, they say so, which is literally just an English word. They say so. Again, I try and imitate it, but it's very, very hard for me to do. But the way they sort of elongate their words and the way they speak is just so laid back and cool. And then again, the way they sort of replace the R with the L, I find really interesting. And yeah, I don't know what it is about Puerto Rico. I don't know why there's so many incredible artists that come out of there. But again, I'd really like to travel to Puerto Rico and find out a little bit more about what's going on there. If you are interested in listening to some more Puerto Rican Spanish, you can just listen to those artists that I've already mentioned, or I like to listen to some of their interviews as well. So it's not just Spanish from lyrics, it's more Spanish like interview and conversational Spanish. They've got a bunch of interviews because they are massive artists. So there's loads of stuff online that you can find of them speaking. And in terms of slang from Puerto Rico, if I'm being honest, I don't know too much. I know one word that's said quite a lot in Bad Bunny songs is berraco. And then another thing that I find quite cool is wow wow. Wow wow is how they say a bus. And not just in Puerto Rico, it's that sort of region. I know they say it in the Canary Islands as well. And I think it's generally said in sort of Central America, wow wow, or that sort of region of Puerto Rico, Cuba. That's where wow wow is said as well. I think Mexican Spanish, generally speaking, is very easy to understand. But again, like I've said, there's so many different accents and dialects within Mexico. I'd be here all day trying to describe all of them. But I think generally speaking, Mexican Spanish is quite interesting and just easy to understand. They pronounce their words in a way that for us English speakers, it is quite easy to understand, I think. And one thing that really interests me and I find cool about Mexican Spanish is the jerga mexicana, or the slang that they use. But at first, I find it really, really confusing, especially the word pedo, because I'd always been taught that the word pedo means fart, but this is not the case when you start listening and understanding Spanish from Mexico, because pedo can be used in so many different contexts. It is crazy. When I first started listening to Mexican Spanish and the amount of times that they were saying pedo, I was like, what is going on? Like, have they got some weird obsession with the word fart, or am I just an idiot? Have I just learned this wrong? And yes, it was the case. I just learned this wrong. That's not how pedo is used in Mexican Spanish. But don't get me wrong, they still say pedo as fart, but pedo can also be used as a greeting, like que pedo. It can also be used for problems, like no hay pedo, there's no problem. You can also use it to say hay que estar al pedo, like you have to be alert. You can also say it to like, be in a good position, hay que estar al puro pedo. Hopefully that's the right context. Hopefully that makes sense. If you're from Mexico, please let me know if that's wrong. But the way I interpret that was like to be in a good position, hay que estar, or estamos en un puro pedo. And also you can say pedo to mean drunk. And if there are any Mexicans watching this video, please drop me a comment if there are any other uses of the word pedo, because yeah, I'm still a bit confused with it. I'm trying to learn more and more about it and more about the Mexican slang. And here's some other Mexican slang, way, no mames, que padre, órale, ándale, chale. So yeah, those are some examples of Mexican slang. I know there's a lot more out there. And the final country that I wanted to mention and talk about Spanish from is Peru. Realistically, I don't know too much from Peru, but I'm going there this summer, so I've been trying to do a little bit more and learn a little bit more about the slang and the way that Spanish is spoken in Peru. But realistically, I do need to learn a lot more. So if there are any Peruvians out there or watching this video, please let me know about the accent and more about Peruvian Spanish, because I'd love to know more. But I do know some little bits of Peruvian slang, so I'm going to touch on those now. I know pe and oe. Pe is how they say pues in Peru, and also oe is used instead of oye. But I also heard pe at like the end of sentences when pues, I don't know, to me, does it make sense? So I'm not sure if it's used in any other context other than just pues. And I don't know, causa. Causa is like how they say friend. Sentence could be like habla pe causa. I think that's quite a common greeting. But again, I think Peruvian Spanish is decent to understand. I haven't had any problems listening to it. And in terms of the way they pronounce words, I think it is another one that's not too difficult to understand. And one final piece of slang that I just remembered is asumare. I think you pronounce it that way. It's what you say when something surprises you or shocks you. Realistically, I do need to learn a lot more about Peruvian Spanish because I'm going there this summer. So if there are any Peruvians watching this video, please drop me some comments and help me out with some more slang and bits that I can learn about Peruvian culture. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It has been a long one for me to try and talk through all of these different countries and make sure that I haven't got anything too wrong. Again, I just want to say please forgive me if I have made some mistakes. Hopefully I've also helped people that are trying to decide which country they want to learn Spanish from. Hopefully you've learned something from this, maybe helped you decide which country you want to learn Spanish from. Yeah, please let me know in the comments if you want any more videos like this. I've really enjoyed making this one, even though it's been a tough one and a long one. The sun's almost going down. Please let me know if you want any more videos like this in the future. And hasta la próxima. Adios.